My second month inside, a man I had known for about 9 days told me to go and spend almost every dollar I had on a radio. $11 and change, I had 14 in my account. It was one of those little commissary radios with a clear plastic case, because every single thing you are allowed to own in there has a clear plastic case, so an officer can look straight through it without ever opening it up. It came with one cheap earbud that only worked properly if you held the wire a certain way. I was angry about it, genuinely angry. $11 was soup and coffee and stamps for a month, and here was a man I barely knew telling me to blow all of it on a radio I did not want. I wore that thing nearly every day for the next 12 years. Not for the music. I could not name you 3 songs I heard on it. I asked him why, at the window, with the slip already in my hand. And he said, and I have thought about this sentence for 20 years. He said, so when somebody asks you what you heard, you ain't lying. That is rule 1, and there are 9 more, and every one of them is about the same thing. Let me tell you what I am before we go any further, because it matters for the next 20 minutes. I am not a man anybody in that building was ever afraid of. Nobody ever crossed a day room to get out of my way. I had no reputation, and I did not want one. If you clicked on this for a story about a guy who stood up to somebody, it is not this video, and I would rather you found that somewhere else. Here is what I have got instead. 12 years in a state maximum security prison where 4 or 5 groups ran everything the officers did not run, and I came out the other end having never been jumped, never been to the hole for fighting, and never once been asked to join anything. That last one is the part that took actual work. So 10 rules. 9 of them I held for 12 years. 1 of them I broke in my 4th year in roughly 4 seconds over an ordinary question a man asked me in a hallway on the way back from chow. It cost somebody else 6 months. That is rule 4, and when we get there, I am not going to make myself look better than I was. One boundary before we start, same as always. I am not naming a single group. I am not teaching anybody anything they could use to hurt somebody. And I am not telling war stories. Because in my experience, the men who tell those were either lying or they were part of the problem. All 10 of these are about staying out of things. That is the only expertise I have got. Before rule 1, you need one piece of information about the building because it explains everything after it. Officially, there are no gangs in an American prison. The words on the paperwork are security threat group. Affiliation is prohibited, and the state is not permitted to sort men by race either. The Supreme Court took that up in 2005 in a case called Johnson against California and held that racially segregating prisoners has to survive the strictest scrutiny the courts have got. Now walk into the day room. There is not one piece of paper anywhere in that building telling you which tables are which. Every man in that room knows. So does every officer in it. I watched officers move a new man's bunk assignment quietly, no conversation, nothing written down, off a map that officially does not exist. That gap between the printed map and the real one is where you actually live. All 10 of these rules are just different ways of not getting caught standing in it. Rule 1, buy the radio. I mean that literally, and I also mean the thing underneath it, which is that you should arrange your life so that not knowing is believable. Here is what I did not understand at 19. In that building, information is not knowledge. Information is a liability you are carrying for somebody else. If you heard the argument at the phones, then you are a man who heard the argument at the phones, and now 2 different people have a reason to find out what you are going to do with that. Neither of those conversations is one you want. The earbud is not a lie. That is the whole elegance of it. I really was not listening. When a man asked me what happened down at the far end of the tier and I said I had my music on, that was true. And it was true in a way he could see from 30 feet away because he had watched me walk past with the wire in my ear like I did every single day of my life. The radio was not about music, and it was not about privacy. It was a visible, public, permanent explanation for why I never knew anything. Cheapest insurance I ever bought. Rule 2, sit down last. Where you sit is not a seating choice in there. It is a sentence about yourself. in a language you do not speak yet, spoken to a room that reads it fluently. I learned this in my first week and I got lucky with how I learned it. Day room, mid-afternoon, mostly empty. There was a long table by the wall with nobody at it, so I sat at the end of it because I was 19 and it was a table and there was nobody at it. That is genuinely the whole thought I had. A man came over. I had never seen him before, and I have no idea to this day what he was. He put one hand flat on the table in front of me, not hard, and he looked at me for a second and said, "You're new." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Then don't be first." And he walked off. That was it. He never spoke to me again in 12 years. I sat there for about 10 minutes trying to work out whether I had just been threatened, and the answer was no. And it took me a long time to understand that what had actually happened was a correction. He had taken 20 seconds out of his day to stop a kid from making a sentence he did not know he was making. So after that, I did not sit first, ever. I let the room fill up. I let the tables settle into whatever they were going to be that day, and then I took the spot nobody would read anything into. It cost me about a minute, 12 years of being a minute late to sitting down. Rule 3, never take anything for free. You have heard me tell this one a dozen times, and I am not going to do the whole thing again. Third day, 2 soups and a honey bun through the bars from a man I had never spoken to, my neighbor telling me through the wall to hand it back that same night and telling me exactly how to say it. Plain and easy, no disrespect, I am good. Hunger passes, obligation compounds. The only thing I will add here that I have not said before is that this rule is not really about food. It is about being a man with no open accounts, and you will see why that matters at Rule 8. Rule 4, never answer a question about another man. This is the one I broke, 4th year. Walking back from evening chow, ordinary Tuesday, nothing in the air at all. A guy I knew a bit, not a friend, not a problem, falls into step next to me and asks me something completely flat. He asks whether so-and-so was in the day room that afternoon. And I said, yeah, he was in there. He was on the phone. That is it. That is the whole thing. 9 words in a hallway. I want to be honest about the state I was in when I said it, because it was not fear and it was not pressure. It was worse than that. It was politeness. Somebody asked me a normal question in a normal voice, and the ordinary human part of me that grew up outside answered it the way you would answer anybody who asked you the time. I did not think about it again for 2 days. Then the man I had said that about got taken off the tier and went to the hole, and he lost his job and his visits and did not come back for about 6 months. Now, I want to be careful and exact here, because this is where a man in my position starts making himself the center of somebody else's disaster. I do not know that my 9 words were the cause. There was clearly a whole situation going on that I knew nothing about, which is the point of Rule 1. Maybe I confirmed something 3 other people had already confirmed. Maybe I was the last brick, but I was a brick. That is the part I am certain of. And here is what it actually cost me beyond him, which is the part nobody thinks about. For about a month after that, I was a man who answers. That is a category. Somebody had asked me something and got a straight answer, and that information moves. And for a few weeks, I could feel people testing it. Small questions, nothing questions, seeing if the tap still worked. I had to become boring again, and becoming boring again is much harder than staying boring, because now you are refusing people who have already had a yes out of you. The correct answer, the one I have used every time since, is not a lie and it is not a refusal. It is 4 words with no edge on them at all. I wasn't out there. Say it the same way every time, to everybody, including the people you like, especially the people you like. Rule 5, have no opinion about the television. I am being completely serious. The dayroom TV was the single most fought over object in that building, and I never once, in 12 years, said out loud what I wanted to watch. More fights start over remote control than over anything anybody out here would consider a real reason. And the reason is not that men in prison are childish about television. It is that the TV is the one piece of that building where a group's authority is visible and public every single evening. What is on that screen is a scoreboard. So I read. or I sat there watching whatever was on with no expression on my face, and I would not have been able to tell you what it was. Rule 6. Be exactly the same every day. Same shower time, same phone day, same seat, same walk. I showered in the back half of the second shift every day for 12 years. I walked the yard the same direction as everybody else, and I do not think I went the other way around once in over a decade. I called home on the same evening every week, even in the years when there was not a lot to say, and there were a couple of years where there was not a lot to say. Because unpredictable means somebody has to keep an eye on you, and getting an eye kept on you is the beginning of every bad thing that happens to a man in there. Predictable men are furniture. Furniture is not a threat, and furniture is not an opportunity. I have talked before about building a routine so tight it stops being a decision you make. This is the reason. Rule 7. Never be the second man to arrive. When something starts, and you will hear it start, everybody in that building sorts into 3 groups within about 4 seconds. The men involved, the men who came over, and the men who went the other way. Nobody remembers who was in the third group. That is the group. I want to be clear that I am not telling you to be a coward, and I am not going to pretend that distinction is as clean as I would like it to be. There were times I walked away from something and I still do not feel great about it. But the arithmetic in there is not the arithmetic out here. Out here, you go over because somebody might need help. In there, going over makes you a participant in something you have no information about, on a side you did not pick, in front of about 90 witnesses. There was a guy on my tier, second year, who was as ordinary as I was, worked in the laundry, called his mother constantly. Something started at the phones one evening between 2 men. And one of them was a guy he had ridden in on the bus with, and he went over. He did not swing at anybody. He did not touch anybody. He stood next to the man he knew for about 15 seconds, and then an officer came through the door, and it was over before it was anything. 15 seconds. He lost the laundry job inside a month. He got moved off our tier before the summer was out. And for the year, I could still keep track of him. He was somebody people had a category for, and every bit of it came from standing next to the wrong man for a quarter of a minute in a room where everybody was looking. He was not in anything. He just showed up second. Rule 8. Owe nobody and make sure nobody owes you. Everybody understands the first half. Debt is the classic way men get taken in there, and I have never met anybody who did not know that going in. Almost nobody understands the second half, and the second half is the one that got men I knew. If a man owes you, you now have a decision to make about him, and you are going to have to make it in public. He does not pay, and every man on that tier is watching to see what the guy who is owed does about it. Do nothing and you are a man, things can be taken from. Do something and you are in it, and whatever he is attached to is now attached to you. Being owed is not an asset in there. It is a scheduled appointment with a problem. So I did not lend. Not stamps, not soup, not a book, not a phone slot. Not once in 12 years. And I know exactly how that sounds. Rule 9. Never let anybody give you a name. Nicknames in there are not affectionate. A name you did not pick is a claim somebody has made on you, and it will stick to you for years. Across units, across facilities, long after everyone has forgotten who said it first. There was a man on my block, older than me, completely decent, who dropped a tray in the chow hall in his first week. That is all he did. Everybody looked the way everybody always looks, and he went red and said sorry to the room out loud to nobody, the way you would in a restaurant. Somebody at the nearest table said one word about it. He carried that word for the next 4 years that I know of, and probably longer, and by the end he was carrying it in a different building in front of men who had never been in that chow hall and had no idea it had ever been about a tray. That is what I mean by a claim. Some guy spent half a second on it over his dinner and it outlived every relationship in that man's life inside. The way you avoid it is unglamorous. You do not do anything memorable. You have no catchphrase, no story anybody wants to retell, no reaction worth setting off twice. When somebody tried one out on me, I did not object to it because objecting is a reaction and a reaction is what makes it stick. I just did not answer to it flatly every time until it was more effort than it was worth. Rule 10, never be the only one who saw something. This is the one that runs everything else. And it is the last one because it is the hardest to explain to people out here. If something happens and there were 40 men in that day room, you are one of 40. Nobody has a reason to think about you at all. If something happens and there were two of you, you are half the problem. You are now a person whose memory matters to somebody, and men have been hurt over what is in their memory who never had the first intention of using it. So the second the temperature in a room changed, I moved. Not fast, not obviously, and never toward anything. I went and stood somewhere with a lot of other people in it. I will give you the most boring example I have, because the boring ones are the honest ones. Law library, a weekday, 4 of us in there, and 1 officer somewhere down the hall. 2 men at the far table stopped talking. That is all that happened. They did not raise their voices. Nobody stood up. One of them just went quiet in the middle of what he was saying, and the other one looked at the door. I put my book back on the shelf and went out to the water fountain in the corridor where there were about 20 men waiting on a movement, and I drank water I did not want for a while and then went to my cell. I have no idea what happened in that room. I have no idea if anything happened in that room. That is exactly the outcome I was going for, and I did some version of it a few hundred times over 12 years, and I could not give you a count. Now, the thing under all 10, and I will keep it short, the man who told me to buy the radio said something else to me about a year later that I did not appreciate at the time. I had said something about staying neutral, pleased with myself, and he shut it down instantly. Nobody in here is neutral, he said. You're just not anybody's problem yet. Stay that way. He was right, and I was doing something slightly different from what I thought I was doing. I did not stay out of the gangs. Nobody stays out of them. They are the weather in that building. What I did, without being able to name it for about 6 years, was make sure I was never worth the cost of recruiting. I had nothing anybody needed, so there was no reason to come and ask me. I owed nothing, so there was no lever to pull on me. I knew nothing, so there was no reason to keep me close. And I wanted nothing off anybody, so there was nothing to offer me. Not brave, not neutral, just not worth the paperwork. The honest limits on all of this, and they are real ones. That was 1 state, 1 maximum security facility, and 1 12-year stretch that ended a few years ago. Group structures are not the same everywhere, and they are not the same decade to decade. In some systems, the thing I am describing is far more organized than what I lived under, and in some, it is much looser. There are facilities where a man genuinely cannot do what I did, and if you have somebody inside and their reality does not match mine, believe them and not me. And I want to say plainly that these 10 rules cost me things. This is not a set of life hacks. It is a description of how a man makes himself into furniture for 12 years, and furniture does not have friends. Which brings me to what came home with me. The gift first, because there is one, and I use it constantly. I can walk into a room, any room, a job site or a family thing or a waiting area, and inside about a minute I know who is with who. Not consciously. It just arrives. Who defers to who? Who is performing for who? Who came in together and is pretending they did not? It has made me extremely difficult to lie to, and it has saved me from 2 bad jobs and 1 bad business partner, and I would not give it back. The damage is Rule 8, and it is not close. I cannot do favors. Either direction. My neighbor came over last spring and asked to borrow a ladder. A ladder, standing in my driveway on a Saturday with the friendliest face on him, and I heard myself say I was going to need it, which was not true, and the ladder sat in my garage for a week and a half doing nothing. I could not tell you what I was afraid of. There is nothing to be afraid of. I have run it through my head 100 times, and there is no version of lending that man a ladder that ends badly. Something in me still files a favor as an open account, and an open account as a lever, and it does it before I can get a word in. Some prison rules you keep, some of them you have to unlearn like a language, and some of them are still standing in your garage a year later, making you look like a man who does not like his neighbors. I would like to hear from you on this one, and I mean it specifically. Which of the 10 surprised you? I am guessing Rule 8, the being owed one, because it is the one that reverses what people expect. But it might be the television, because that one sounds ridiculous until you have sat in that room. If you have worked in corrections, I would genuinely like to know how much of this map you can see from your side of it. Because my honest guess is that officers see about 80% of it and know they see 80%. And if you were inside yourself, or you waited at home for somebody who was, which rule did nobody tell you? No names, no groups, no case details, nothing that costs you anything. Next time I want to take you into something I call the debt ladder. Because I told you here that a $2 favor turns into a lever, and I did not show you how. And the how is 4 steps long, and it happens to men who are not stupid and who see it coming and take it anyway. That is the video. I will leave you with this. People out here ask me how many fights I saw in 12 years. It is one of the first questions every time, and they lean in a bit when they ask it. And the true answer is that I cannot tell you. Not a rough number, not an order of magnitude. I do not know. That is not modesty, and it is not me being careful with you. That was the entire job. 10 rules, 12 years, and every single one of them was a different way of arranging my body so it was somewhere else when it happened, and my head so there was nothing in it afterward. I did not learn to fight in there, and I did not learn to be dangerous. I learned to be the man nobody would have thought to ask. There is a pair of earbuds in my truck that I put in when I walk past 2 people arguing in a parking lot. There is no music playing. I do not turn anything on. I still do it.